Okay. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this month's Positive Parenting Practices webinar. Our topic today is Nurturing a Resilient Family. We are pleased to have you join us, and we hope you will consider joining us for future conversations as we continue to work to make this event a monthly free opportunity. And we are going to have more opportunity to do that thanks to some COVID funding provided by the City of Lee Summit that will allow us to continue these classes for free, as well as provide some ongoing Love and Logic classes with full scholarship opportunities for families who have been directly impacted by COVID. So we're very excited to have that funding opportunity. I am Rachel Segovia. I'm the director of Lee Summit Cares. We are a nonprofit organization that seeks to mobilize community partners to develop a culture of physical and mental wellness for Lee Summit youth and families that inspires positive, healthy choices. You can learn more at our website, lscares.org. And I'm joined today by parent facilitator and longtime Love and Logic teacher, Carrie Gray. Carrie is a licensed family and marriage therapist with Rediscover Mental Health and has spent the past several months, even more than that now, I guess, Carrie, since March, Carrie has been helping Lee Summit Cares respond to the COVID-19 crisis and helping our families respond to that crisis. So we are so lucky and pleased to have her today presenting our Nurturing a Resilient Family.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rachel. I appreciate your introduction. And we are recording, as Rachel said. So if you know of people who aren't able to make it to this live session, what they can do is go to the Lee Summit Cares website at lscares.org, and we will have a link there, or you could go to our Lee Summit Cares YouTube channel to see it. But as Rachel was saying, today we're going to talk about a really important topic that's certainly very timely amidst the stresses associated not just with living everyday life, but also living everyday life within the context of a pandemic. And so specifically, we're going to focus in the following areas. We're going to talk about what resilience is and essentially why it's important. And then you're going to get a lot of information and tools for how you yourself and how you can help your family, your children to all become more resilient. And so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and move us forward here. And if any of you have questions along the way, please go ahead and put those in the chat box, and I'll try to pay attention to that and answer questions as we go. Otherwise, we'll catch those questions by the end of the workshop. And so let's go ahead and get started here. And so the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what exactly is resiliency? And essentially, what it is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress, such as what we're experiencing right now, living during a pandemic. Now, how it works is what we find is that resilient people, when dealing with excessive life demands, will actually cope better, especially when a situation cannot be resolved. So what that means is you're going to live with it more competently and with less pain. The second piece or third piece of this that's also really important is that resilience isn't something that you're born with, but it is something that can develop over the course of your lifespan. All right. And so when you think of developing resiliency, it's a process of not waiting until a difficult situation has passed by, but rather to learn how to develop resiliency skills within the context of whatever difficult challenge or situation that you're encountering at that time. And so this is something that we can teach little kids, as well as, like it says, anyone could learn these skills throughout their entire lifespan. And so, some characteristics, it's important to think about characteristics of people who are resilient. And so, make some mental notes of these because in the next few slides, I'm going to read descriptions to you of people who are well known, even on a national level. And your job is going to be to identify who these people are. And so, whoops, somehow we forwarded without intending to forward. So let me go back. So here's first characteristic of a resilient person is someone who views problems and challenges as opportunity. And so we view this as a certain type of mindset, a positive mindset that's optimistic, that's looking for silver linings in whatever situation comes their way. In addition to that, when a person makes a mistake, they look at that as an opportunity to learn and grow, an opportunity to figure out a different way of accomplishing whatever their end goal is. We know that resilient people succeed despite their hardships. We know that they seek out new and challenging experiences. And so, getting comfortable expanding beyond routine, trying new things is something that helps you to develop that resilience. They also don't let anxiety and doubts overwhelm them. And so there's good emotional self regulation that's involved in this, and also have a sense of humor and realistic optimism under stress. And when I'm referring to realistic optimism, we're talking about realistic expectations given whatever that situation is. They don't feel shame or depression in the face of failure. And so that goes back into learning from mistakes and the concept that each time a person fails, they're getting closer to reaching their goal. So you can see how that ties back into that positive mindset. And finally, through all this, they're able to transform a sense of hopelessness into a sense of power. And so let's look at some famous people who have lived through tragedy, trauma, a lot of adversity, and become very successful in life in spite of that. And so if you know who this is, feel free to go ahead and text your answer in the chat box. Somebody already got it. She was born to a teenage mother and grew up in poverty in rural Mississippi. She experienced abuse as a child and at age 14 gave birth to a son who died at 2 weeks of age. She landed a radio job in high school and began co-anchoring the local news at age 19. You are correct. Oprah Winfrey overcame a great deal of trauma and adversity in order to be the successful talk show host and person that she is today. There she is, most popular talk show host in history. Let's try another one. He didn't speak until he was 4 years old and didn't read until age 7. His parents and teachers thought he was mentally handicapped. He won a Nobel Prize and came the face of modern physics. Who would this be? We know we've got Oprah was in our last one. Who is the face of modern physics? If you know who the person is that we're describing, go ahead and write it down. Excellent. Albert Einstein. You are correct. And so imagine this brilliant man starting out his early life as a child, not reading, not really communicating with other people, yet he developed into the physicist known for developing the theory of relativity. We've got one more. This author had her first manuscript rejected 12 times before being accepted by a publisher. And so who is this one? J.K. Rowling, that's right. Our famous author of our Harry Potter books is the person who we're referring to here. And so you can see how there's a certain mindset that each of these individuals had. They had certain abilities along with that, certain strengths that they put into practice that helped them to overcome any setbacks that they experienced. And so today, what we're going to do to start here is a self reflection. All right. And the idea behind the self reflection is for you to think about a significant challenge you have faced in your life and overcome. Um, Answer to yourself, how did you make it through? Or if you'd like, feel free to share in the chat box. How did you cope? Who helped you? Why didn't you give up? Because the key here is that we have all already experienced many challenges in life. Our children are going to experience challenges in life. And we have already put into place certain resiliency activities, efforts, mindset that likely helped you through your previous experience. And so it's important to reflect on that as you think about any experience that you feel overwhelmed by now, because we can draw upon those past experiences to help us during this present time. And so, how do we develop actual resiliency? So, this one is from the American Psychological Association when they identify things that we can do in order to develop relationships and develop resiliency. We know that those relationship connections are a big part. And so, for us as adults, the question to ask is, who are your people? It's important for us to have supportive relationships and relationships that are meaningful in many different areas of our lives. For example, you might have a friend that you go to confide in when you need advice and you need an honest answer, someone who knows you well and is willing to share what you need to hear. Yet you may have another person who you go to just to blow off steam and to have fun. That person who's willing perhaps to try new things. We go to other people when we just need somebody to listen, a person that we can vent to. And so the idea is to think about those connections that you have and looking at the importance of those connections and helping you to be resilient. In fact, as we look at data on the importance of relationships with youth who have been affected by trauma, by adversity, by abuse, that we find that just one supportive relationship with a loving authority figure or adult can change the trajectory, I think I said that right, of that person's life in a positive way. And so while we know that our relationships are important and it's important for us to stay connected, later on in this presentation, we're also going to talk about things that you can do in terms of your relationship with your children that will help them to grow in resiliency. So, another thing we know is the importance of maintaining a daily routine. When you think about COVID, we know there's many things that are not directly under our control. We don't know when a vaccine will be readily available, although we know that one is being developed and plans are being put in place for how people will receive the vaccination. Especially in times of uncertainty, it's important to maintain some type of daily routine because this helps to provide a sense of structure and to provide you with a sense of control over your life and the things that you're doing. And so this is equally important for the adults in the home as well as the children in the home. Another one that's important is to model and encourage self care. And so I want to go back to the chat box and just have you put any comments that you'd like to share in terms of the things that you're doing to model good self care. What are you doing to take care of yourself. These can be things as simple as taking breaks, going outdoors and going for a walk. Some people engage in self care by doing something crafty, or maybe it's a creative project that you're working on. The key is that it's something that you do that works for you, that gives you a sense of peace, but also restoration. It refills your cup when you're feeling depleted. And so, if any of you have things that you'd like to share in that area, please do. I'm starting to see some things out. I started, every day at 5 p.m. I walk. Excellent. Working out twice a week, exercise, reading books. Make time for that creative outlet. Doing sewing and also mindfulness, meditation is a wonderful self care tool. And so it's awesome to see that you folks are already implementing things, and that self care, taking responsibility for your own self care, is only something that you can do. And so we don't want to wait for the stressful situation to pass. All right. Instead, we want to take charge, take personal responsibility for using that self care, because it will help us to develop resilience. And so I'm going to give you one example before I move on to our next one, and that is we can even talk out loud about our self care and what we're doing in order to help educate our kids. And so we might say, wow, today has been a really hard day. I'm going to go unplug for a bit and take a hot bath and just relax for a while. And so, talking openly about the things that we do for our own self care is a wonderful way to model that and to share that with our kids. And you might even find that they start using similar language. Um, the fourth one here is to model and encourage goal setting. And so for now, that might just be, what do I want to accomplish during this particular week? And so we just take it one step at a time, especially when we're feeling overwhelmed. What is our goal? And how do we break that down to little steps, meaning things that we can do each day, each week, in order to get closer to whatever that overall goal is? The next one is to nurture a positive self view. And so, having self compassion and giving ourselves grace is critically important. It's important to know that when we are experiencing higher levels of stress, that we naturally experience something called a negative bias in our thinking, which means our thinking is somewhat clouded by our perception of the situations where we perceive things, interactions, other people, situations in a more negative view. And so we want to be aware of that. And we'll be talking about how we can correct that type of behavior, things we can do to improve there to have a more positive self view. Keeping things in perspective is important, realistic perspective, that is, and just having a hopeful outlook as an overall outlook that you have on life. Looking for opportunities for self discovery, allowing your children to learn from their mistakes and problem solve. And so our kids become more resilient when we don't rescue them from the consequences of their poor choices. Instead, we figure out what would be a logical situation. We help them consider solutions to their problem. We help guide them, but we don't solve their problems for them. This builds resilience and self confidence the next time a problem comes along. And we also know that volunteering, helping other people, getting outside of our own individual situation, is a wonderful way to build resilience that's a win win. when I volunteer, when I do something for another person, even if it's something as simple as complimenting another person on something they did or anything, that makes that person feel good, and you don't have any idea how those words could really change a person's day. But it's also good for the giver as well. Then the last thing that's mentioned here is really hard, but that is to accept that change is a part of living. All right. And so we are having to continue to adapt. We know that change is a universal part of life, and that learning how to adapt to that change is something that helps us to become overall more resilient. And so those are some main components that we look at putting into practice. All right. So you can look at those and think about, okay, where are some areas perhaps that I as an individual can improve on, and make a note of that. And those are some areas where you can start in your growing of resilience. Now, to break this down further, what generally we do is we talk about resilience through three different aspects. And so, one of those aspects is the psychological aspect or mental aspect. And that has to do with our thoughts and our emotions. So, how we view the world around us, as well as, and the interactions around us, as well as how we experience our emotions, how we're able to self regulate our emotions, to make choices based on thinking rather just a knee jerk emotional reaction. And so we're going to talk about ways in which to help to better regulate both of those areas. Another piece is obviously the physical aspect of resilience. And so, what we find is that people who are more resilient have certain lifestyle habits, which means things that they do on a daily basis. And so, things such as getting up and having a wake time and a sleep time that's consistent, along with some type of routine that goes throughout the day, is one lifestyle habit. And we're going to talk about other lifestyle habits that are proven to help people be more resilient. And then the final one here is the behavioral perspective. And so this gets down to the things that we choose to do, our actions, and also the way in which we interact or communicate with other people. And so let's look at these in terms of the psychological, the thoughts and the emotions. And for this, we're going to use the example of our kids. And so, how do we nurture a positive view of self so that we can also help our children to develop a positive view of self? And I found this wonderful poem that I think it's a poem for kids, but I feel like this poem relates to anyone. And it's the acknowledging that, and I'm just going to read it. Sometimes life is hard. Sometimes life is unfair. Sometimes you feel really sad and no one seems to care. When bad things happen to us, when everything seems gray, when nothing seems to work out, then that's the time to say, time out, think about it, try again another way. All right? So perhaps you can relate to what this poem is communicating here. And the idea is that our life is not going to be without hardship, without suffering, without having to deal with aspects of adversity. And as parents, our tendency is going to be to want to protect our kids as best we can. But what we're finding in the research and how to actually develop and build resiliency in our kids is that our kids are better off when we teach them how to navigate through difficult times. Now, the issues that our kids are going to experience are going to be much different than our experiences. So, what their stressors are might not seem like a big deal to us, but they are a big deal through them. And by helping them to navigate through whatever stressors they're dealing with, we're actually providing them with building blocks of resilience to deal with situations also down the road. And so we know that when we are feeling overwhelmed, when life seems so unfair, when we don't feel like there's anyone who cares, that it is important to hit that pause button, to take a time out, to step away so that we can cool down, to rethink that situation so that we're ready to come back and deal with it in another way. And so, again, I'm not sure where the source came from, but I do like that poem and the reality of life and how we can just be honest with our kids about that and help them to navigate any challenges that come their way. Now, this is another excellent resource that I found from the Search Institute, and this is their developmental relationships framework for how parents can help nurture resilient children through the relationship that we have with them. Now, what's interesting about the study results that I'm about to share with you is that these ideas actually came from the youth perspective. And so these are things that youth of all ages are saying that, hey, mom and dad, hey, teacher, hey, role model, these are things that we need from you to help us develop our resilience in the area of relationships. And so the Search Institute has these broken down into these 5 categories. We need to express care, challenge our kids to grow. We need to provide them with support. We need to share power and look for ways to expand possibilities. And so I'm going to get into these, both of these, all of these, a little bit deeper in these slides. And so essentially, the first one that was mentioned is to express care. And so the kids are saying, hey, show me that I matter to you. And because in our world, we tend to get very caught up in the busyness of everyday life, sometimes we need to be reminded to intentionally do things that show that we care. All right. And so when we talk about being dependable, essentially they're talking about someone who they can trust, someone who they can count on to do the things they say that they're going to do. When we refer to listening, this is a topic that comes up a lot in our conversation with youth, but to truly eliminate distractions and to give our kids our full and undivided attention so that we can ask questions and get perspectives on things that are happening from their point of view. And so that shows that we care, that they matter to us, to have empathy when we're listening them talk about any challenge that they might have. A third aspect of this is simply to believe in your children, which I'm sure we believe in our children. Sometimes their behavior can be frustrated, but we do always want to convey that can do message. I believe in you. Because when kids are given the opposite message or any message that they give, they tend to live up to or down to that standard. And so when they make a mistake, for example, the message that we want to communicate is you're smart. You can learn from your mistakes. when they're venturing out to try something new, the message we want to convey is, yeah, it's kind of scary doing something new, but I believe in you. You can do this. Give it a try. All right. Other thing is just being warm. And I'd like to, when I talk to parents in Love and Logic classes, we talk about starting every day and ending every day with a hug, which can be a metaphor, but just a, hey, good morning. It's great to see you. Love you. So excited about the day. And we always want to end the day also on a positive note. And so if there's problems that occurred during the day, we need to set some time to potentially put those things to rest and leave things in a good place. Or just to say, I know we had the disagreement today, but I want you to know that I really love you and that we're going to figure this out, get a good night's sleep, and we'll talk some more tomorrow. All right. So, those are ways in which we express to our kids that we care. As I continue to talk about these different categories as they come up on slides, if you want to use the chat box to provide additional examples of things that you do with your kids to show that I care, show me that I matter to you, please share those in the chat box, because the more ideas we have, to share, the better. And so we do I love you rituals daily. And so I think that's awesome. And those might be coming in part from another resource is through Becky Bailey and Conscious Discipline. So if you're wanting to dive deeper into the I love you rituals, you could just Google that or go to their website. The next one is to challenge personal growth. And so we want to push our kids to keep getting better. All right. And so that's why it's important that when they get frustrated, and they will get frustrated along the way, whether they're learning to read, or maybe they're now doing geometry, in high school, or maybe they have that college professor, that's just very difficult. We acknowledge that it can be frustrating and perhaps we want to give up, but that it's important to continue to push forward and do your personal best. All right. So when we keep that in mind, it's also important that we don't compare our children to their siblings or to their classmates or to the neighbors, but instead, the message is you do your best, and that's what we want from you. Okay, you do your personal best, and for each person that can be a little bit differently. We also want to stretch our kids to do things that maybe they don't believe they can do. And so being able to put that pressure, and pressure might not be the best word, although they might describe it that way, but being able to encourage someone, your child, to stretch beyond what they think they're capable of is something that helps our children to grow in tremendous self-confidence. And so an example of that, I coached swimming, and I had an athlete that did not want to swim the butterfly. And so I knew that she was ready and that she could do it because she'd done it in practice many times. And so I said, I know you're a little bit freaked out about this, but I know that you can do it. And so you're going to do it. And so reluctantly, she got up there, swam the event, and came over to me and said, "Oh, that wasn't so bad." Right. And now that's one of her favorite strokes. And so it's important that we stretch our kids to face whatever that fear might be. Give them, again, that goes back to believing in me. We also know that it's important for us to hold our kids accountable for their choices. So that could be a good choice. Hey, way to go, right? Or it could be a mistake, a not good choice that they make. We as parents have a tendency to lecture our kids on making good choices and being responsible. And then we tend to step in and rescue them or protect them from their poor choices, or we fix the problem for them. it's important that we step away from that type of behavior, because when we allow our children to own and solve whatever problem, whatever mistake they create, when we're there beside them, not between them and the problem, this is where they grow in self confidence. This is where they grow in critical thinking skills, problem solving skills, which is a big part of developing resilience. We also can reflect on our failures and setbacks along the way and look at it not in terms of something that we should feel shameful about. Remember, resilient people do not view failures as something that they should be shameful of, but rather they look at a failure that they've had as an opportunity to learn, as a step closer to whatever their goal is. And so, if you'd like to comment on any ways in which you already challenge growth within your home, with your children, even with yourself, feel free to go ahead and put those in the chat box, because the more information we have to share, the better. And so, I'm going to go ahead and try to forward the slide. Uh-oh. Okay, there we go. All right. So we have 3 more areas, and I'm going to go through these a little bit more quickly just because of time. And so the next one is provide support. And so that is to help me complete tasks and goals, but that doesn't mean to do it for me. All right. And so if we have a kid who's struggling, for example, with homework, we're going to teach them how to navigate through that story problem. Maybe we create a different story problem and show the child how to solve that problem related to math. But then they hold the pencil, you don't hold the pencil, and you sit with them and encourage them as they work towards solving a similar problem on their own. And so helping with that navigation, but not stepping in and taking the pencil and doing it for them, is important. And that's a part of empowering them, which we know is super important. Advocate for them when they need help. And so if the child's certainly not getting a subject, and I'm using school as an example again, and they're trying their personal best, then we need to advocate for them. I know parent-teacher conferences are coming up, and to see what other resources might be available to help them. And the final one here with support is to set boundaries. We need to provide our kids with limits and structure in order for them to feel secure. And the bottom line is our kids are not always going to appreciate the boundaries or the limits that we set. And so keep in mind that they will thank us later, all right? And so when you say, for example, you're welcome to have your cell phone back as soon as you're finished with X, Y, or Z, and the child tries to argue with me or you, I get argued with, that's when we say, I love you too much to argue. And so we need to set limits and boundaries, especially in areas as our kids get older, especially where they're not able to do that themselves. All right. And so that is another critical piece. The next one is sharing power. And so we want to ask our kids questions. This ties into listening. We want to include them in the decision-making process, especially when it affects their day-to-day life. And ultimately, we might have to make a decision that they don't like, but we need to explain why we're doing it, but also just work to include them, to respect their point of view, to collaborate, get their ideas as much as you can. We want to develop those, the sense that their voice matters. Then finally, the last one that I have here from the Search Institute study is to inspire, broaden horizons, and connect. And so this is how we expand their view of their world, their experiences of the world. And so if you would like to write some things in the chat box, ideas on things that you are already doing to expand your children's experience with the world, please do. I know some people travel. I know there's places that you can visit through websites if travel is not obviously, many people aren't comfortable doing that, going to the library, lots of different things that we can do there. So please do share. But what we find with these five, and there's three big findings that came out of the Search Institute. One is that kids who have the parent-child relationship that helps to foster growth in these areas are, number one, more responsible in terms of whatever their responsibilities in life. They're just more responsible overall. They're also more motivated in terms of their schoolwork, and they're more respectful to other people. And so we all want these things for our kids. And so my thought to leave you with on the Search Institute study is that you could get more information by visiting their website, but then you can also reflect on these headings and consider some ways in which you could implement the things that were talked about in those slides. So let's go ahead and move forward again. And if there's questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box. My chat box has disappeared. And so if Rachel, if you want to help me out there, if questions come up. But one of the other aspects of resiliency is learning how to be with our emotions, to not allow them to overwhelm us or to cause us to act out in a way that we would regret. And so we refer to this as emotional self-regulation. And I encourage you, when you have time, to Google Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain. And he provides a wonderful description of how what I'm going to explain to you works. So if you want more information, definitely go to YouTube and Google his hand model of the brain. And so if you look on the right side of your screen, basically he's showing you different regions of the brain and how they relate to how we manage the stressors that we experience in life, whether it's adult stressors or little kid stressors. And so as you look at the bottom or the wrist, you'll see that that is our spinal cord. All right. And right up from there is our brain stem, which is located at the base or the back of our skull. This is where our fight, flight, freeze response takes place. And so if you ever see your kids argue or have a fit or have a tantrum, that's an example of that fight response. Flight would be when your kid runs away or maybe even tries to avoid the problem. And so instead of dealing with that hard math, they're focused on social media. Freeze is when a child or an adult breaks down because they're so overwhelmed. The key here is that the brain stem, which holds the fight, flight, or freeze response, and the limbic system, which has your hippocampus and your amygdala, basically together they work to regulate your sense of arousal as well as emotions. All right. And when we go up to the very top, to that prefrontal cortex, this is where thinking and reasoning takes place and where it helps us to manage our stress. So we can learn how to use our brain to manage the stress or our reaction, our emotional reaction to different things that happen in our environment. Now, the goal behind this is that we have to identify when our feelings are rising and find effective ways to prevent you from flipping your lid. So if you look at the left side of the screen, that's an example of a lid that's being flipped, where essentially the spinal cord, the prefrontal cortex, no communication is happening there. And so you'll notice that when a kid is having a tantrum, when they're really upset, all reason goes out the window. We don't think and we don't problem solve when we're overwhelmed with emotions. And so thankfully, there's things that we can do in order to calm our stress response. And Dan Siegel provides a lot of resources through his website. If you just Google his name, one of them is talking to kids about being able to name whatever the emotion is that they're feeling. And so he refers to that to name it, to tame it, meaning we need to be able to name it to know how to manage that feeling. But even before we get to that point, we know there's different things that we can do to calm our central nervous system and that fight, flight, fright response. And so this is one suggestion that's called, as you can see, box breathing. And this is something that the Navy SEALs use in order to stay in control and to reduce their stress and anxiety in the situations that they encounter. And how it works is think of the number 4. And so you're going to breathe in through your nose for 4. Then you're going to hold your breath for 4 seconds. Then you're going to exhale for 4 seconds. Then we're going to breathe in for 4, hold it for 4, exhale for 4. So you're going to continue to go through that process. And the research on their website recommended to do this for 4 cycles to help calm that central nervous, that stress response when you're feeling overwhelmed. Another one that suggested to calm our central nervous system is to tune into your senses. And so this is one that you may have already heard of as well, where maybe you do a sensory activity like this outdoors. And so you label 5 things that you can see. And so you're becoming more aware and present of your environment. So I can see these 5 things. What are 4 things that you can hear? What are 3 things that, 4 things you can feel? And so you might reach out around you. What are 3 things you can hear? 2 things you can touch? What's 1 thing you could taste? And maybe you can't in that situation. But the idea is simply by engaging even one of your senses, research has shown that that will help to reduce or calm your stress response. And so I have the next slide has a quiz for you, quiz question. And so who can tell me which response we're engaging here? Whoops, well, probably the same one actually. But the one with the animals obviously is our sense of sight. And so just engaging that can help make you smile. Perhaps you even noticed a smile on your face when you looked at these pictures, because it's hard not to smile and feel a sense of calm unless you have a puppy that's currently destroying your house. But we will move on from that. So think about ways in which to engage your senses and do this when not in a state of fight, flight, or freeze. So we can teach our kids to do this when things are going well and it's easier to teach the process. You can do it with a raisin. You can do it with a lifesaver. These are just some of the things that I've used in the classroom to teach kids, but learning how to manage that response when the problem isn't happening is a great skill for them to develop. Then finally, as we wrap up, so these next few slides talk about our lifestyle habits. And so essentially, you've heard it many times that how we fuel our body has a great impact on how we feel. And so this slide illustrates that it's best for us to have less of the sugary foods because foods that are high in sugar content tend to have an inflammatory effect on our bodies. And so when going to the grocery store, dietitians recommend trying to buy most of your foods from the perimeter of the store. And what do you find there? You have your fruits, your vegetables, your milks, your cheeses. Um, the things in the middle of the store are more your processed foods, which are notably more convenient, but not necessarily the healthiest for you. So we want to buy more of the whole fresh foods and fewer of the processed foods. I was told once that purchasing things where you can understand the ingredients is a good thing, as well as looking for food items that have five or less ingredients. But the reality, folks, is that sometimes you just need a donut, and that's okay. The important things is more of the healthy foods and less of those sugary, high carb foods, and that will help your body, that fuel, to be better. Now, here's one that is an important lifestyle habit, and that is getting appropriate amount of sleep. Now, as adults, the research shows that we as adults need a minimum of 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Yet many adults will laugh and say, oh, no way, that's not going to happen. Or maybe we're developing insomnia, which makes it hard. But people really, unless they're an outlier, and there are very few, that we need, even as adults, that minimum 7 to 9 hours of sleep for restoration. All right. And so our body needs this so that it can restore itself so that we're, for example, less vulnerable to bacteria, viruses, etc. The same is true for our kids. And for those of you who have more than one child, you might recognize that one of them might need more sleep than the other. All right. And so, how much sleep a person needs is an individual thing. But these are some recommendations that come from the American Academy of Pediatrics. And this is an area where, especially with our 6-year-olds to 18-year-olds, we're going to need to help with any kid put some boundaries in this area. And I'm going to go with especially our preteen and teens. And so here's how you do that. Here's what we find in the research about healthy sleep habits and sleep hygiene is that number one, we want to be consistent in terms of the times that we go to bed and wake up in the morning. There's a myth that you'll just make up for that sleep on the weekend, which has been disproven. We have better sleep rhythms when we're consistently getting the correct amount of sleep, and that is helped by having a consistent bedtime and wake up time. Another thing that we need to consider is the space. And so providing a space where it's dark, the temperature is comfortable, the mattress is comfortable, there aren't loud distractions is another critical part of getting a good night's sleep. Now, the third one, removing electronics, is critical for many reasons. And your kids might argue that they use their cell phone for an alarm clock, but I encourage you to go and buy an old fashioned alarm clock. And here is why. What we find are when adults and youth are on screens before sleep, that what happens because of the blue light is it causes the release of melatonin to not happen, which melatonin is that natural hormone that helps you to feel sleepy. Teenagers or preteens, those who are going into puberty, have a harder time falling asleep just by nature of their brain chemistry. All right. And so they'll say they have a difficult time falling asleep. So knowing that if they have their cell phone there or some other screen, we know that that's further interfering with the release of that melatonin that we need to feel tired. But the other thing is that when they have that phone nearby, they're likely to want to check out what's happening. They might get a notification, and so there's the fear of missing out, which can cause problems. As adults, when we're on screens before bedtime, we might become upset, by something that we see on the news. It creates more anxiety and it's harder to relax. Or maybe we see something on social media that makes you feel uncomfortable or sad. And so for adults, it's important that we model this by removing ourselves. The recommendation is to remove screens an hour or even 2 hours away from the time that you're going to bed. So instead of doing that, do other things to help wind down for the evening. Some people read books, some people will watch a mindless show, even though that's a screen, which we're going to turn off an hour in advance. Drinking tea, those are things that help. The next one, these last two, and we're getting close to wrapping up here, is to avoid caffeine. So if we're drinking a lot of coffee during the day to stay awake because we're not getting enough sleep, that's just going to create a sleep problem, okay? And also it says large meals and even alcohol at nighttime, because while alcohol acts as a depressant, so you might be able to fall asleep, what we find is that as the liver is processing that, it causes you to wake up. And so people that drink alcohol before bed are more likely to have problems with sleep. So another thing to keep in mind. Then the next one, our final one, is getting regular exercise. And so we know that will help us to sleep better, but we also know that there are all these other benefits that go along with exercise. And so the key here is that it's just movement, getting out and doing something that gets your heart rate going, that causes you to break a sweat. That happens 4 times a week for 30 minutes. That's kind of the threshold that we're seeing. And this can be incorporated into the day. And so, for example, if kids are home, on Wednesday's work day, just getting up and putting some movement within different parts of the day can help them overall stay engaged in the study and concentrate on the things that they need to do with regards to their virtual school work. And so that was the last slide. And I do want to share with you some additional resources. These were also used to develop this workshop today. And so I certainly recommend that you look into that. I also wanted to let you know that you will be getting some type of evaluation for today's discussion, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback as we continue to offer these types of workshops. And then finally, I wanted to make you aware of our next webinar that will take place on Tuesday, November 17th at 4 p.m. We know that COVID is having a real negative impact on the mental health of our family, friends, loved ones, colleagues. And so we are having a guest speaker, Kirsty Millar, with Rediscover's Zero Youth Suicide, Zero Adult Suicide programs, is going to be coming in and talking about how to have a conversation about mental health and what to do if you're concerned about someone who's maybe expressing thoughts of suicide, how to have that conversation and how to connect that person to the care that they need in order to be safe. And so we hope that you'll be able to join us for that discussion as well. And so there's some information below also. Knowing that now is a stressful time, there are other hotline numbers that you can call or text. And you may or may not be aware that there is also a COVID crisis line. And so this is handled locally, and you could call that 816 number and talk to a licensed counselor who will help you in terms of stress management, putting things into place during this time. And so, what I'd like to do now is just see if there's any questions before we log off. And I think we can go ahead and stop the recording at this point. And so, if anyone has questions that you would like to ask about information shared, I can